joined us. You've heard that we had a few web page problems, but we are fixing that. We may have other people join us. With that, my name is Ann Schneider. I'm the chair of the SFO Roundtable's ground-based ad hoc committee, and I am calling to order our meeting on July 30th at 3:02 p.m. We are meeting via Zoom teleconference pursuant to the shelter-in-place order issued by San Mateo County Health Officer, the Governor's Office, and the CDC's social distancing guidelines, which discourage large public gatherings. Joining us today to help staff this meeting are Angela Montez, our Roundtable Administrative Assistant, Linda Wolin, Senior Legislative Aide to Supervisor Dave Pine and Acting Roundtable Coordinator, Justin Cook, our Technical Consultant from HMMH, and Kathleen Wentworth, Senior Advisor to Congresswoman Jackie Spear. We also have Bert Winong and other staff from the Airport Noise Abatement Office. And I see a fellow ground-based noise member, Councilman or Vice Mayor, Mr. Royce?
Both, Vice Mayor.
Both. Councilman and Vice Mayor Al Royce from Hillsborough. And please note that the following we will be recording this meeting, and the recording will be available on the Roundtable in a few days. And at this point, I'm going to hand it off to staff or to Linda to explain how the public can participate in today's meeting. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Angela.
Good afternoon, Chair Schneider. For those attending this meeting wishing to make public comment, we will use the raise hand feature on Zoom. During the general public comment period and for each item on the regular agenda, Ms. Montez will ask the members of the public who wish to comment to click on the raise hand feature to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. When you hear your name called, Ms. Montez will prompt you to unmute your account and inform you that you may begin speaking, and you will have 2 minutes. Please note that members of the public must wait for Ms. Montez's prompt in connection with each agenda item before using the raise hand function. We will have regular public comment plus the 2 items on the agenda, and just wait for the item that you wish to speak on. Written comments that may have been submitted in advance will be read by Ms. Montez during discussion of the appropriate agenda item. Thank you.
Okay, and I believe our first item on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have anyone?
Thank you, Chair. So we're not going to take public comments for items not on the agenda. As a reminder, if you wish to speak, please press *9 or raise hand feature. And we did not receive any written comments, and I do not see any hands raised. Thank you, Chair.
Very good. Then we're going to move on to our biggest item on today's agenda, and that is Justin Cook giving us a report on how to do a spectral analysis. So, Mr. Cook, I hand it off to you.
Should I share my screen for the scope of work? Would that be helpful?
Sure.
That would be very helpful, and I think Linda's working on that.
Oh no, I think
I'm able to. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, it's great.
I can see it.
Okay, great. So I'll be walking through this scope of work as we wrote it. It's been a while, February. So the first item is to discuss data information that we would need in terms of data to conduct the GBN noise modeling. And so I listed 3 items here that has a variety of items. I actually, in advance, and thanks to Bert's office and Bert, actually have received all of this data already. It's about 4 gigabytes of data. I have not actually gone through it to see if it contains everything that we would need, but pending approval and with approval, we would go ahead and proceed and go through that data, see if there's anything else that we would need in terms of elevations, roadways, buildings, things of that nature that we would put into the model to conduct the modeling with those components included. Next, in the scope, we talk about the various scenarios that we propose to run, and this was from our discussions at past meetings, trying to take into account everything that we could, also keeping budget in mind in terms of the number of scenarios, just because as you can imagine, as you increase the amount of scenarios, that's just more processing, computing time, and analysis that will go into that. So I'll just quickly run through those scenarios, and you're happy to get any feedback. But we were going to look at 2 different aircraft types, and those aircraft types, as we discussed, could be it could be selected however you guys would want, but we recommended looking at the most frequent, maybe loudest aircraft departing runway 1 left and right, in coordination with Bert and his team at the noise office. We would then take that information back, make sure we have the appropriate source noise levels for that data that would be incorporated into the model. Offhand, I don't see any problems because my guess is that the loudest and most frequent are probably within the model, so I don't envision any issues there. And then we would also look, we talked a lot about vegetation and locations for that. So if we were to want to run some scenarios, incorporate into the scenarios some differences in vegetation, whether locations, types, heights, thicknesses, that information, we would look towards this body to provide us with that information so that we could incorporate it into these scenario runs. The scenarios each have 2 different aircraft types. You could see that we broke it down into runways and at different positions along the runway. So start a takeoff roll, and then at a secondary takeoff point, which is basically the position on which they're rotating to then gain altitude. And with and without vegetation for all those. So each scenario actually has multiple sub-runs, modeling runs within it, by aircraft type, and then with and without vegetation. And then per the last discussion, I know it's been a while, we discussed an idea about aircraft departing at the same time. So scenarios 1 through 4 are really looking at aircraft that, we're looking at the individual aircraft and seeing the differences and the delta differences between various things such as vegetation. And where scenario 5 is where we're considering 2 aircraft departing at the same time, staggered on the runways, of course, like you usually see, with and without vegetation. And what would AsiaMH produce? We would be producing in the model Lmax noise contours that would be overlaid on a base map so that you could graphically see each scenario. So each aircraft type with and without vegetation, each of those would have its own distinct figure that you would be able to see differences, and you could see the effects of shielding on those graphics. And then we would be able to tell you what the noise levels are on a spectral basis, actually, not just an LAQ or Lmax value, but broken down by frequency. We could tell you for each scenario, for each of those sub runs, what the noise values are at up to 12 receiver points. So we would look to this body to tell us what receiver points are of interest. I could envision seeing co-locating one of those receiver points or two with one of the permanent noise monitoring sites, but we could take a variety of different points and we can make some recommendations ourselves based off of some initial feedback. But we would be able to then, in each of those runs, be able to tell you what the values are at each of those locations, which would further help in showing the differences on a frequency basis. So that's pretty much a summary of the scope as we had kind of discussed it in previous meetings. So I'm open to feedback and comments, and I'll be taking notes here and happy to answer
Justin,
any
before
questions.
you scrolled back, it looked like you were getting to the budget part or the cost
Yes.
estimate. Did you want
Yes.
to talk about the cost estimate
Sure,
before we
sure.
open up for public comment?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yep. So basically, HMMH proposed on a time and material basis not to exceed $50,000. And what I had done to come up with that value, and in consideration of the scope and everything we've previously discussed about, is really look on a basis of what it would take to conduct the modeling and staff and all the hours that would go into not just producing the contours, but also producing the contour figures and a technical report that also includes a statement of purpose and background information on ground-based noise, which would kind of involve looking at, which we had gone over is looking at the previous studies that have been done and kind of summarizing to date where ground-based noise is, but providing a good background before we get into some of the results that would be part of that. So this is kind of that, keeping in mind all of those different scenarios and sub scenarios that we would be doing. So.
And I think
Hopefully
because
that
Linda
helps.
and I have had conversations as we waited to come back, that the $50,000 was an amount that we talked about before COVID hit and before local governments and the county government started getting the budget implications of the COVID disaster. So Linda, why don't I open it up for questions, and then Linda, if you want to give us an update of where we think, is it reasonable to still assume that amount, or do we have to be looking for sources of funds?
If I may, the available amount is still TBD. I think it's fair to consider this proposal within that amount, but one thing that would be good to come out of this meeting is to prioritize the variables and the scenarios that are most important. So for example, should we have some amount less than 50? And we'd ask Justin to modify the proposal a little bit. What would you be willing to take out? And then the converse would also be true, that if we can identify something slightly more and could expand the study in a certain way, is there something missing from here that you'd like to see? And then I might suggest action by this subcommittee such that there's some discretion given to staff in consultation with the chair to proceed without having another subcommittee meeting at another time, if that is acceptable. We can get to that as we discuss the specifics of the substance here.
Okay, then let me open it up to the panelists, which are the members, but panelists because of Zoom language. Any comments? Al, do you have anything?
Yeah, if you, Justin, thank you. It's been a while since I've thought about this, frankly.
Yes,
We've had
yes.
Yes.
honeymoon period here for the last few months, so this has not been top of mind. When we originally talked about it, I was trying to remember exactly
Mhm.
what we wanted out of it, what the deliverable was supposed to be, and what we would do with it. Could you help me understand or refresh my memory as to some of the discussion surrounding the initial decision
Yeah.
to move forward with this?
If I recall, I think it was really looking at, ultimately getting an understanding of what the delta differences or changes in noise levels would look like through various mitigation strategies. And we talked about those mitigation strategies, and ultimately I know some of the focus was on vegetation, and that's why we put that in there. We also had talked about walls and perimeter walls, and some of the complexity there in where that would be located. And you'd have to break line of sight and given terrain that there might be issues. So I think we proceeded with the vegetation route, but also knowing that we were going to model buildings and surrounding structures into the model to better understand how noise is reflecting off of surfaces. And by providing this base understanding and report that kind of summarizes ground-based noise and these modeling results and delta differences, I think it would provide a good foundation, one, to see the effects of vegetation, and also understand how noise is propagating from the runways and being reflected. And that could then lead, possibly, not knowing based off the results, but maybe that perhaps leads to a recommendation on some other solution that we didn't think of, but that knowing the results of the modeling, it comes to light, or it's something that could more easily be done since the model will have been created. So, and I'm just throwing something out there, but if we see, hey, that there might be a possibility to get some mitigation from a wall placed here at this height, we could throw that into the model and quickly see if there's any change. And so this is really an initial one to see, kind of understand the environment, understand what's going on in terms of reflection and distance reduction, and vegetation. I hope that helps.
Oh, no, it helps a lot. And so the proposal you're coming up with is we can effectively put the vegetation, different types, different densities at different places and determine the outcomes on the model.
Correct.
So,
Yes.
and
Yes. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, you hit it right there. Is I would be looking to see where that would want to be placed, and there's alternatives there that, okay, if we were to put this material down at this height versus this material at this height, what is there a difference there? Is there not a difference? And we could look at some of those results, and I think it will inform a decision on whether that's something that the group wants to proceed with.
Gotcha. It's coming back to me now. Sorry.
Yep. No, it's okay.
No, that sounds, but my understanding, my recollection was there had been very few of these studies, if any, done on ground-based noise. So we really don't have other studies to compare this to based on either process they followed, assumptions they've used, and results they found. Is that my memory correct on that or not?
Yeah, there's been historic research that has been done, but its focus was primarily on, I would say, mitigation in terms of sound insulation of a home.
Oh,
and not so much on, and to a certain degree, how sound propagates, of course, and some of the things. I think where this study would be different and relatively new and something that hasn't recently been done is just with the advancements of the noise model and just digital, data and all the data that we have in terms of buildings and surroundings and various things, something that is quite unique and I don't think has been done to a large scale. I know that there are instances where someone will model a ground run up, in a ground run up enclosure, just see the differences. But this is something a little bit different in terms of ground-based noise.
gotcha.
So
And one last question, Madam Chair. The aircraft types, help me understand what types, when you say two different, which
Okay.
types, what's the parameters? What are we talking about there?
yeah, so what I mean by that is different aircraft types will emit a different spectrum of noise. And so what we would do is look at modeling two different types, and potentially if the budget was enough to look at different types, you could do that, or it could also be reduced to maybe just one aircraft type to see the differences. Because what I want to say about that is we're really focused on looking, in my opinion, on the differences between the noise levels, not necessarily, well, you could look at which aircraft types are producing maybe the loudest ground-based noise, but where I think the study, where I would recommend the study go is more looking at how changes could be done, and the differences between different scenarios that would affect change, that possibly could lead to reduction. And so in that case, the number of aircraft types perhaps doesn't necessarily, it might not be worthwhile to do 10, but having a sampling of say 2 or so within a budget would be good, just because they have different spectrum coming out of it. So we would look towards guidance on what you guys would want to see. If there's a particular aircraft type that for example, produces to feedback of the community, produces more ground-based noise, we would want to know that, and that would be one to consider. Or you could do what we suggested, which is look at the predominant aircraft type, or perhaps what Bert in his office would determine to be maybe the loudest aircraft type.
Yeah, I think on this study that I think we need some assistance in helping understand which types we want to look at, both with respect to which are the most common or predominant at the airport at different times, or conversely, which ones are causing the most complaints right now or right before the pandemic. And I'm not sure I have enough knowledge to try to determine which is which, but my gut would tell me that different aircrafts will yield different results, and we ought to try to figure out if there anything on the aircraft that we think is recommended to reduce noise on takeoff. If something pops out.
Yeah, and I think that's why having a variety of 2, if not more, would be beneficial to see those differences. And I think close coordination with Bert. I'm not sure if Bert's on, but
Bert is on.
Oh, he is. Okay. Close coordination with his office would be, I think, really helpful in making those determinations, especially in terms of feedback and comments received from the community and just knowledge of, airport operations.
The only other comment I would make on that, and by the way, I'm very supportive of this. I mean, I think as we talked before, it's just coming back to me and listening to your report. we need better data before we can come up with better answers. So, you know, cart before the horse, as they say. But from a longer term perspective, I'm most concerned, frankly, from a global perspective, is the supersonic airplanes and what impacts they might have down the road, if in fact they ever come to San Francisco. So I don't know how that factors in on all this, but that's not a today's problem, but it could be a massive problem tomorrow. So.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I would like to welcome Burlingame Councilman Ricardo Ortiz to the meeting. Ricardo is, of course, also the chair of the roundtable. I have Kathleen's hand up and then Ricardo. I put you on the spot, Councilman Ortiz, but I assume you'd like to say something. Ms. Kathleen? It's the unmute
Okay. Do you
button.
want Ricardo to go first, or?
Chair Ortiz, would you like to go?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kathleen, for giving me the floor. Alan, I'm trying to kind of thinking back of where this all came from and how we arrived at some of the parameters and some of the things that we wanted to learn from the study. The one thing that we've always been very curious about and we really struggled with is how the noise travels and how it bounces off of our mountains and our buildings around. It's funny that I have some people in town who never hear noise and they don't complain. And then there's other people who stay up all night hearing all the airplanes. I had one guy who moved maybe 10 blocks down the hill, and he went from not even noticing it to truly staying up at night because he heard it so loud. So part of what I've been really interested in finding out is how these sound waves travel, how it is that some areas are so impacted while others are not. And once we understand that, then we can talk about, it would be a little clearer what mitigation efforts would be effective and what we can do. So looking at the proposal, I think it addresses what we've asked for. I think it makes sense. And I think the vegetation part of it, I think is very intriguing too. I think we talked about that on the Millbrae side, but once we talked about it, the response was that vegetation close to the receptors, the homes, could have an impact too. So that was kind of where that came from. So anyway, lots of questions. I think that this might bring us some answers. So with that, Madam Chair, I go back to Kathleen, someone who knows what they're talking about.
Kathleen, if you don't mind, if I could just add to Councilman Ortiz. So Justin, on the two criteria, looking at materials, if I had your slide back, but do we have space to look at topography?
That will be included.
That would be included. Okay, very good.
That is included in there because it's specifically the data that we would have for buildings. You know, we would have the airport environment, you know, airport property buildings, and potentially some of like the hotel, for example, and some outline buildings. But once we get out to residential homes, we wouldn't necessarily have residential 3D structures in GIS. So where that will come in is exactly what you're saying, which is terrain. So we'll incorporate the terrain in those areas to see the effects of the noise propagating.
Excellent. I have about 8 of my own questions, but let's go with Kathleen.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Couple questions. I really think that this is a great study, and I think you've taken what we need to know about the things that we can change that can make a difference, and that's really what we're looking at. So you've got the difference between noise, theoretically, between one left, one right. You've got, Justin, the difference between the reason for doing the start of the takeoff roll and then the secondary is just to see if which of those is sort of travels further, if they travel differently. Tell me what that's about.
Yeah, I think that was just based off, I mean, it's hard to remember our previous meetings, but I think that was based off of a concern that it may propagate differently at different points, and not just in distance as well, but also at the angle of the departure, that it may spread differently. Yeah, I think that was the general concern there.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to see that you're going to do a side-by takeoff on one left and one right, as is fairly typical there, because I think that's going to bring us some interesting data. The one thing that you might think about, just which you need another thing to add to your budget item, although it is quite difficult during the daytime high traffic times to even consider this, there could be, or there might be, don't know, a difference between runway takeoffs that are static takeoffs versus rolling takeoffs. And by that, I mean, you go from taxiing right smoothly into smoothly coming up on the power for a rolling takeoff, as opposed to being from a stopped position and adding the power in. And I don't have any basic information about that it would make a difference, but it seems like it might, or it might just spread it out because you'd be in a turn on sort of like taxiing and into takeoff. It might deflect some of the initial takeoff, initial power thrust in a wider area, which could be good or could be bad. I don't know which it would be. So I think if there's enough money to look at that, that might be an important consideration. As I say, that's not something that could easily be done in high traffic times because the tower needs airplanes to be very often in a stopped position, ready to go, taking off when the aircraft are coming past them, landing on 2A. But it might be something that I think we can look at for nighttime when there are hours that it is less traffic, and whether we're looking at single runway takeoff and avoiding, side-by takeoffs. Maybe we want to try to encourage a rolling takeoff or a static takeoff, whichever turns out to be most advantageous. So from an operational standpoint, I think that might be something we could have a discussion about for some of the low traffic nighttime periods.
Great point.
I think that's all I have to ask or comment on. I'm done.
Great. I have some questions for Bert. And I'm sorry, I feel so much more formal. Usually when we were meeting in person, the ad hoc committee is a lot more casual. But because we're being videotaped, I guess it brings on a more formal presentation here. So I have a couple of questions, Justin, and I think a couple Bert might be able to help with, but I'm going to go with what Kathleen just said. It was my understanding that with every takeoff, we hear two main noise incidents with the noise trailing down. So if they're at the end of one, left or right, they're sitting still, then they take off. So there's that first kind of boom, but not a sonic boom. They roll down the runway, and then as they lift off, there's a second one when they increase their thrusters. And I thought that that's how Bert has tried to explain it to me, because I hear both those sounds when only one plane is taking off. So there's definitely two different experiences. Is that what you're talking about, Kathleen?
No,
And you're on mute.
No, that would be something different.
Okay.
And this is just probably the difference between the power setting in having so that you would enter the runway with your taxiing level of power, and then you would line up for takeoff. And while you're doing that lining up, you're gradually adding in a little bit more power. And then when you're lined up, ready to go, you would it's like one continuous adding up power. And I just don't know what the sound spectrum would be on that versus sitting at the airport and gunning it all at once. Don't know.
Yeah, and I think what we had in the scope is exactly what you described in terms of that secondary point. And as Bert described before, what Kathleen was saying, which I've experienced having flown out of there many times, is where you're taxiing and there's no complete stop at the end of the runway threshold. You're just rolling and they go and they,
Right.
And looking at that and seeing if there's an effect on the thrust there that may be different. I think I captured that correctly, right, Kathleen?
Cool. Well, agree. I love the idea of the study. I'm so excited that we're finally having another meeting and that this is going to go to the roundtable next week. A couple of quick questions. On your first page, you referenced rubber, but I think you were talking about rubber in the form of a sound wall as opposed to rubberized asphalt. See, it happens every time.
No,
So-
actually, I was talking about exactly what you're describing in terms of rubber
Rubberized
on-
asphalt.
Correct. Yes.
Oh, excellent. I mean, the one piece of good news through COVID is the work they're doing on managed lane, and when they repave 101 north and south, it's going to be rubberized asphalt. So we'll have one tiny noise increment along 101 getting quieter, but however that will be. Okay. During COVID, and I don't know if Bert and his staff have experienced this, there are so many fewer planes that it's much easier to hear different sounds. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I can, and I've many times gone up to the top of the parking lot at the BART station, mainly because I'm watching what's happening in the construction of our new TOD. But up there you can hear very distinct sources of sound. It's been very unique. And then I've also been doing a lot of work in the backyard. And whereas I had thought most of the noise was coming from one way, one, left or right, I now think that some of the 28 takeoffs, the noise is hitting the facilities at the airport and wrapping along the new hotel, which happens to beeline straight to Millbrae City Hall. If you carry that curve off of the hotel, it hits, the direction would go to Millbrae City Hall and then actually right along my house and then on up the hill. So again, this is another increase in the budget, but I'm just throwing out there that I think some of the noise that we are experiencing, at least here in Millbrae, is actually 28 takeoffs. Any comment on that? Oh, I see you're adding potential new things.
Yeah.
And it's funny because for the first, well, and I think, whereas I didn't always write it down, but usually I do have notes where I write different noise things that I experience. I think since the skin went on the hotel, so not the framework, but once the glass went up, that's when I started experiencing noise from the north. We never experienced noise from the north before, north of where I live, which is 406 Palm Avenue, versus the noise that come off of 1 and 2. So I'm just throwing that out there as one more complication. Going back to the...
Can I
I'm
ask
sorry.
a quick question, Anne?
Please, please.
Do you notice a difference in weather when you hear that or not?
The hard thing about weather is I'm not typically gardening when it's raining.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, it makes it more complicated to try to do that. But, you know, at night, even with the windows closed in the wintertime, yeah, there is a sense of the noise coming from the north as opposed to coming, as it turns out, my house is fairly directly close to 1. And I only knew that because my neighbor cut down 2 4-story oak trees, much to my depression on losing 2 big, gorgeous oak trees for that. But clearly those oak trees helped also protect our house from a little bit of noise. So a good thing for the vegetation study. The other question, going back to the question on airplanes, one of the outcomes that I don't expect is the main goal of this study, but we might learn more, is are Boeings worse with ground-based noise than an Airbus? Is a Boeing 737, which is getting retired, worse than a 47 or a 57 or a 777, whatever the airplanes are? And could we then encourage manufacturers to be doing whatever they're doing with the better airplanes? And I think it's complicated because it's also the heaviness of the airplane. So for the worst ones, I think for Burlingame and for Millbrae, it's those flights taking off from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning, which tend to be freight or very full planes with a lot of fuel and a lot of passengers going overseas or going to South America or going to Washington, going to the East Coast. So were the airplanes also tell us if they're full or not? Does that make more noise? Or should we just assume that it does?
Definitely factors are even in terms of noise certification, weight and engine type is a factor. It's a tough one. There's many variables there that determine that.
Okay.
Noise certification wise, generally speaking, at least what I've seen, Airbus are usually certified quieter than Boeing in general, but it's a different metric, and it's not
Okay.
looking at frequency or ground-based noise. So I can't really specifically say, but I think that's something that, you know, in considering a couple aircraft types or possibly more would be beneficial in considering which ones are selected.
Okay.
Trying to get a variety, like you said, ones that clearly are different, that are more heavies, like the 7.4s or the 777s, would be different than, say, a 737.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Again,
looking at those different types could be beneficial.
I strongly encourage people to go up to the top of the BART parking lot, the 5th floor. You can stand there. There's not a car up there, a person up there, and just listen to the sound from different airplanes. There are so few of them right now. You can hear every distinct sound. It's a great learning experience. I'm sorry that we're losing the revenue from all of the lack of flying. Okay, my last question then would be the other outcome that I'm hoping from the study, or maybe it's from a discussion, clearly a discussion after this, is are our current monitors in San Bruno, Millbrae, Hillsborough, and Burlingame picking up ground-based noise, or do we need to get more permanent and or rotating noise monitors to get a better feel of where those are, where the noise is coming from? And I just see Councilman Ortiz did a finger up, a thumbs up on that one. So I don't know if that could be an outcome of this study or just something we use to help figure out where the monitors should be.
Well, I'll let maybe Bert chime in on that one, but I will say that, I mean, just to clarify, the current permanents are recording ground-based noise in that they are recording frequency-based noise that, you know, yes, the event detection is, you know, based off of a, you know, SEL metric. However, that data is being recorded. Now, the usefulness of having some of the noise modeling results and specifically the contour maps could help facilitate that discussion. In if you look at it like it as a heat map of noise, you may be able to see locations that are getting, you know, the predominant noise from these takeoffs.
Okay, and I think Bert is going to talk to us later about what could go into a ground-based noise report. Linda, do you think that'll come back in that agenda item? I think I saw you say yes, but.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it a little later on.
Okay, so I am all in favor of moving forward. Linda, what would be our next course? Do you need more data or more description here? What do you need?
Well, first I wanted to acknowledge that Mayor Taylor from Menlo Park has joined, and I didn't know if she wanted to offer, I want to apologize to people who joined late that we did have a little technical problem with one of the Zoom links on the website. So apologies if you missed the beginning of this meeting. However, it is being recorded and will be available on the Roundtable website at a later date if you want to go back. But we are discussing this proposal from HMMH for ground-based noise study. And with that, perhaps you'd like to see if Mayor Taylor.
Please, and welcome, Mayor Taylor.
Thank you. And yes, I did miss the beginning, so thank you for providing that information, and I will need to go back and look at it. At this time, I don't have any questions or comments.
Very good. I will say also, Mayor Taylor, we had a good discussion at the technical working group yesterday, but I think like Vice Mayor Roy said, it's hard to get your head back into this. Even me living here, listening to the noise all the time and being stuck at home, it's just hard to kind of get back into it. So I'm glad that we're all here and we can all take forward. So Linda, I have one comment. I haven't cleared this with my city manager because we're kind of so thin right now, but depending on how the financing goes, I will be checking back with our city to see if we can, I hate to do this because I believe it's one for all, but if we can put in some extra money if need be, so that we can do a decent study on that. It definitely affects my residents. And if we're going to do the study, let's try to do it right and be as inclusive as we can be.
Thank you for that. And then I'd just like to clarify with Justin, well, he may have to get back to us on this, but some of the, sounds like we've added a couple of things that might, does that result in an additional scenario, Justin, or modification of the scenarios that you have?
28 left and right would likely do that. Static versus rolling, I would have to, that's a takeaway for me to figure out how we would do that in the model. And I don't see that as anything added. I think that's just a matter of me determining how we could technically do that and achieve, a result that's useful. So 28 left and right, I think would change just based off of the number of, contours and runs and whatnot.
Bert is still on the call. Bert, if you can unmute, maybe you can help me, because I thought you and I talked about the possibility of noise addition. So you've got some runway 1 departures and a 28 departure, and somehow combined, there's either a 1+1 or a logarithmic increase in scale in noise. But it's just a theory. Is that correct, Bert?
Depends on the noise level, but it goes back to our noise 101 and decibel addition. So if you had 2 aircraft at 65 dB, let's say, mathematics, just pull it out at 65. If it goes up anything, it would be 3 dB when you're getting on equal numbers.
Okay. So I think that's what I meant by 28. And I'm not even sure if it would be 28 left over 28 right. I don't know if the big planes take off on the left or the right. I just haven't really paid much attention to 28, except for when we're talking about gap departures and the noise over San Bruno, South City, and Daly City.
I think predominantly 28 left. Bert?
Okay.
Yeah, the predominant takeoff runway is 28 left. Those heavy aircraft that need the longer runway will use 28 right. Although we try to ask that arriving aircraft use 28 right for the making it quieter in Foster City on the arrivals. Keeps them a little.
Bert, I'm sorry, on my notes, you said the predominant is 28 left for departures and the heavier planes are also 28 left or right?
The heavier aircraft tend to choose right since it's a little bit longer.
Right.
And
Okay.
then our arriving aircraft, we ask that they use 28 right, particularly at night, keep them offshore.
Okay. Okay then, so do you need a motion from us, Linda, to carry this forward?
I think maybe a motion to direct staff to work with HMMH to refine the proposal within the budget that is still TBD. Is that, it's a little bit loosey-goosey, but eventually the full proposal and budget would have to go to the full roundtable with a number and the actual parameters. But if we could have direction for staff to work with you, Madam Chair, to finalize that, that would be great.
And I'm sorry, Madam Chair, is the idea that we're going to present this at the roundtable next week?
Can you turn it around in 24 hours? Oh, we don't have to post until Monday for roundtable?
I think what we might recommend, depending on the budget situation, is to present a summary of this meeting and the discussion that we had and some of the parameters that we've discussed for information for the roundtable. But I don't know that we're going to be prepared to have a full motion with an actual budget number attached to it, which I think would be required at the full roundtable level.
So the timeline would be looking for the following roundtable meeting to present it for a vote.
Probably, which actually that reminds me of a question I had for Justin, if I may, Madam Chair, which is about the
Please.
time. Yeah, which is about the timing and relative to just the low traffic that we have right now with the airport. Would some of the, well, you're looking at historical data, right? So the timing as to when you sort of launch the modeling doesn't really matter, or does it?
That's right. Yeah, the modeling's independent of any of that data.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's not a problem.
And Madam Chair, I also want to remind you, there was at least one hand raised from the public.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let me open public comment, and Mr. Jordan Jackson, or Miss?
Thank you, Chair Snyder. For everyone joining the conference, if you would like to make a comment, please press the raise hand feature, or if you're calling in, you may press *9. Jordan, please accept this request to unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Hello, this is Darlene Yapley on Jordan Jackson's Zoom account.
Hi, Darlene.
Thank you for the excellent proposal. I think it's really valuable to isolate the environmental variables to understand what impacts noise. I had 3 questions, Justin. One is for the LMAX numbers. Are you going to be looking at exact numbers? Are you looking at ranges in terms of how you're going to be analyzing the data? Because I think a range could hide some of the impact given the significance of 1 to 2 dBs. So that's my first question. The second question is, are there any additional best practice metrics beyond LMAX that might be able to be suited to ground-based noise that should be considered? And number 3 is building on the Madam Chairman's comments about the COVID impact. Depending on when the study's done, what do you think the impact is, good or bad, if the number of cars are different, full flights are different, the amount of traffic is different, the type of flights given less overseas, et cetera? Is that something that should be considered in terms of the timing of the study? Thank you.
Justin, feel free.
Feel free. Okay. In regards to LMAX, we would be looking at not a range, but an actual value, what we would consider the maximum value, and it would predominantly be like a source noise level, so very close in, not something that's 50 feet away and measured at a certain level. It would be taken almost like a certification noise level of what the manufacturer is providing. Best practice for a metric. That's a great question. I did think about that. And I thought that LMAX would give a different, besides being the maximum noise level received, and therefore probably, the worst case, it's not necessarily a cumulative metric. So I think it's the most appropriate, but I will rethink that as well, and see. It's a good thing to bring up in terms of the metric too. I will say that in terms of the noise model, running an additional metric is producing figures and tables. That's something different. But in terms of running in the model to see what a different metric would look like, that's relatively easy for us to do. So that might, while we're actually analyzing and running the model, it actually might help us inform if we see something in a different metric that might be more useful in presenting. We would bring that forward. And in terms of COVID, I would say that this noise modeling is done independently, in that we're really looking at single events and ground-based noise from those events, and how noise propagates and reflects, and differences in terrain. So it's not really necessarily taking into account operational levels or ambient noise levels around the community. It's really looking at just differences on a single event basis, if that makes sense. Hopefully.
I thank you for that, Justin, but then the problem, if you're only looking at a single event, except for when we've got side by side, which I believe was
Correct.
option,
Yes.
option
Besides
5.
that
Okay.
scenario, yes.
Okay.
But not
All
like
right. And
a
possibly,
operational standpoint.
yeah,
Go
and
ahead.
I'm just really curious, unless Bert thinks it doesn't make sense, is if there's a runway 128 configuration that may amplify noise. But, you know, hopefully you and Linda can talk about that. And if there is a cost to that, maybe that, again, believing in all for one, but I think that's what we're experiencing here, whether it's traveling all the way up to the Burlingame portion of Mills Estates and Hillsborough behind that part of your study will help us with that.
Okay.
Based
Well,
on
I
terrain.
could definitely discuss that with Linda and look at that option when
Okay.
there's more budget numbers available.
Okay.
And then also follow up with Bert if needed on just the idea of, you know, whether it's 28 left or which ones to maybe select and what configurations.
Okay.
We could have those further discussions.
In that case, any further comments? Then I would like to ask one of the ground-based noise members if they would make a motion in a second.
So let me try to put something together, Madam Chair, if I could.
Please,
So,
please feel free.
So the motion is for the subcommittee to recommend the study to the full roundtable as amended with our discussion and subject to budgetary constraints. Does that sound like
we have a
Second.
Very good. Okay, any further discussion? I don't see anybody on the attendee list. Okay. Do we need to call and do a voice vote, Linda? That's how we do it at
Why don't
council.
I ask for thumbs
Or
up
just-
members? So that's the 4 of you. If I could see a thumbs up. That's from Chair Schneider, Mr. Royce, Ms. Taylor, and Mr. Ortiz, for the record.
Very good.
All in
Motion carries. All right, thank you. And Justin and Linda and everyone else who's worked on this, thank you so much. This is exciting, yay. With that, I'd like to introduce Bert. Bert is going to talk about, not to put Bert on the spot, but what potential information should go into a more ground-based noise specific report. Bert, the Zoom is yours. Ricardo, did you have a question? Okay, he must be talking to somebody else. Never mind. Go ahead, Bert.
I was muted. I'm just letting you know I'm having to drop off. I have to go take care of something. So thank you very much. It's been
I
a
would
really
say
good meeting.
congratulations to Councilman Ortiz, who was masking our public behavior. I'm sitting at home, so I don't have a mask on, but good for you.
I should have
Keep
it on.
safe.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bert, it is now yours.
Thank you. Linda asked that I could get up a PowerPoint or something like that, and I'm afraid I couldn't do that with the short time. I needed to speak with our vendor some more. I got little tidbits from him. Greg Bracci, you may recall, came to our roundtable meeting. And he had some more ideas regarding trying to really dig into low frequency and backblast noise more. He thought that perhaps that we go to roving sites with our portables just to see if we can pinpoint and just see how accurate our permanent sites are doing. And further detail on that would be to set up the parameters of those portables very specifically, and maybe even enhance it with a accelerometer to see if we were getting, because some people say they're getting vibration. And while the vibration itself isn't truly a deep thing, typically it's the accoutrement in people's homes that vibrate, or small objects on walls, pictures, china cabinets, things like that. And when I've heard before from HMMH's own staff, when they measure low frequency inside of homes, typically the homeowners walking around create more vibration than any aircraft would. And I'll let Justin verify or deny that one, but I have heard it from their staff. The other one is doing some more work on the LC EQ, LA EQ numbers, which means you're taking the level C equivalent and the level A equivalent. Level C is low frequency, level A is the range that human ear hears in. And then we can do some of the mathematics on the back end to subtract the LA from the LC EQ numbers and give us some real pure low frequency. And that way we're looking at that. We'll also get into the third octave. And then that LC versus LA EQ is a way that they test subwoofers, is what he informed me of. And that's one thought that he had for getting into the lower frequency. I like the sound knowledge of that and the ideas behind it. In fact, he even offered a vibration device to monitor that on loan to us for a short term. So we'll probably take him up on that. We'll wait a little bit until we get a bit more operations to make it a little bit more valid. And then he also stated that we could get together with HMMH to collaborate on locations and parameter settings that we could do that might be beneficial towards incorporating into reports for our office and reporting back to the roundtable.
Okay. I'm looking for Bert's face. He's not a photograph, so I can't see it. Any questions for Bert?
Here I am.
From the committee? Oh, there you go. Okay, now I can read your expression. Any questions? Linda, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify those variables that he suggested. Are those already quote unquote existing in the permanent monitors? It's an on-off switch, or what? Can you explain that?
The monitors that we have gather 1 second events, and you can then take those and the duration and you get into the energy values of it. You can also use a spectral analysis and break it down some more and look at the raw numbers, as one might say, to get deeper into the weeds and see what's bothering people. One of the ideas that I'd looked into earlier was a acoustic camera. So it's basically a microphone array on a plate, say a pizza pan, or even larger, up to 6 feet. And then there's a video camera in the middle. And so you tune it to find what frequencies you're looking for, and then gradually pan and tilt that camera around. And as you do that, you'll see balloons of noise based on the frequency levels you're looking for. So I thought about seeing if we could maybe do some sort of study like that in the future. Right now, budgetary is kind of a iffy question, but we were headed that way.
So just to clarify, it sounds like part of it is already collected in the 1 second data that's already collected, and part of it would be additional.
Right. In fact, Justin's used a lot of that 1 second data to do some of his early analysis.
And then of the existing data that's in the 1 second bursts, for lack of a better word, is there, and what you were just saying about the LC versus LA, if I understood right, is it possible, is it an easy thing to extract that data to include in the existing noise monitoring reports that are provided to the roundtable, like to add a category?
It's more work, definitely. So what we would have to do is come up with some sort of reporting that we would like to do. I'd like to work with EVS, they call themselves now, EnviroSuite, but Greg Bracci's company to see about what sort of reporting that we could do that might be meaningful, that might be worthwhile to the group, and to see where we get it. I mean, if we get into reporting 500 hertz, let's say, and we're looking at 500 hertz events only because we deem that, okay, that's the range that Justin's study says we're bothered by the most, then yeah, we could come up with a report on that.
Bert, I have a question, because I did go through the reports you do for the regular roundtable and for the public, and there's lots of terrific graphics. Do you envision, rather than just charts and tables, some graphics too? As well as maybe contours, which would be graphics.
Right now, we're kind of really looking into the crystal ball. I don't have a clear picture in mind. So once we get narrowed down, yeah, I'm sure we could come up with something.
Okay. Months ago, back when we were all thinking about this, I did have a whole list of what I thought would be graphical representation. It's my geographer background of trying to take data and put it into a pictorial format. I will try to get that typed up, but at least we're starting to look at that. Are there any other questions from the other members? I don't see any hands raised in the participants for what data we might like to see, or, and I don't know if we have, if it's Jennifer, have the group from Burlingame Hillsborough, who I'm sure have some great ideas on what would help them understand ground-based noise, what would go into a report.
I think Dr. Israelit was on earlier, but she's since left. I think that's who you're referring to. And,
okay. And I thought I had seen Mark Shull's hand raised, but he's taken it down.
I think Kathleen had a question.
Okay, Kathleen, please go ahead.
Hi, Bert, I'm not sure if this was discussed at any time in the past, but since we're in this unique period of relatively lower airplane operations, is there some way that this circumstance would make it easier for us to collect data on noise, takeoff noise, that can be correlated with ADS data, such that we could determine if the noise reading at a given time at 12 noon today was due to a takeoff from one left versus one right, or was done by a 737 versus a 747, and maybe even marry in the weather and wind conditions, because that probably has some effect on the noise, just to get us an idea of what the noise is. It would be close to the airport. It's not going to be way out into our communities, but just to get an idea if there are some differences that we can identify now when there's fewer and slower maybe operations. Just a thought.
I've thought of the same idea that you did. Maybe we could do some better discerning of certain events, things like that. We have a part of our new deliverables is a ground-based noise trailer. And that's actually not for this, it's actually for engine run-up testing. So where the airlines will take an aircraft out to a given point on the airport, and much like your mechanic who works on your car will take your car for a test drive, the aircraft mechanics will take an aircraft out to see if they fixed a vibration issue or a leak or something like that. And so we have this trailer that's for placing in mobile locations to test that. Since it has a camera on it, I'm proposing that we put it either a beam to the side of one right and put the camera so it focuses across the runways, so that we would be able to see exactly when the aircraft go. Then we can measure propagation of noise from there to the community. Or second location would be directly behind the runways near the fence line, inside the fence line at the airport, looking down the runways so we'd see when the aircraft go down the runways away from us. And then we'd be able to look at that. So we could use that for, yes, that was definitely an aircraft. It's going to be more pure noise. We'll have some freeway noise, yes, but we'll be able to set the thresholds fairly high, obviously, because the aircraft will be fairly close. So we're toying with a lot of things right now to see what we can do to do better. The big onus on us right now is to see what we can do to make ourselves help the community better. The website enhancements we've done, we're doing some more. We'll be showing more next week. The state certification of our noise monitoring system. We're getting ready to accept a report on the thresholds, which we'll be sharing with the Roundtable and with HMMH to get ready to do that. And then we're going to look at thresholds for all of our noise monitors. We're also working with EnviroSuite to see what we can do about possibly using a different methodology for matching up noise events to aircraft events. Right now we use what's called noise to track. The system will take a aircraft, take a noise event, and then it'll look skyward to the radar data and say, what do I have that might match this? So we're talking about trying to do it backwards. So we would look at a radar track and say, okay, which is the most likely noise event that matched this? It works better in quiet sites, if I recall right. There's another one that we're looking at that might work better in noisy sites. So certain sites like Site 8, right behind the runways, very close to the garage that Chair Schneider has mentioned, is one that's been very difficult for us over the years. More recently, because the aircraft have gotten quieter and it's a different kind of noise. The older aircraft very much A-weighted, and it was a fine site for that. 727s departing, we got them almost every time. Nowadays with the freeway noise, we're blending into that, and oftentimes we get contaminated noise events. So we're trying to see if we can do better on sorting those out and getting pure noise events that work.
So can I follow up? Another question. So Bert, this trailer thing seems like a really intriguing idea that we might be able to get some data out of. How do you recommend that that concept be worked with the subcommittee here, if that's something the subcommittee wants to do? Because I think
the subcommittee's going to be along for the ride. I'm getting ready to do it right now.
Okay. Well, but they might have some input, some ideas. I know, the chair has got a lot of history with backblast noise, and she might want to, it might be great to have some input.
We'll take input, yes. But right now I'm relying on the input from our vendor, EnviroSuite.
So you're actually setting up to put the trailers somewhere at the end of the runway,
A beam
something,
or behind, yeah.
or wherever, yeah. And so that you'll be able to marry that. Now, is the noise captured by this trailer, or is that married to your noise monitor data?
Both. So
okay.
It's hooked into our system. It uses the same type of noise monitor that is on all the poles in the field. The only difference is it has a camera.
Okay. Well, I have one suggestion. I'm not on the committee, but just one suggestion, and it seems like that data should be able to capture one of my concerns, which is the two airplanes at once taking off. And so I think that should be able to tell us if the together somehow is more than just additive in some way. So I'd really to urge you to consider putting that in the study or whatever you're calling your project.
I think that case, we definitely need to be behind and between the runways.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Al, did you have any comments? Okay, I think I read his lips. I think he said, no, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm fine, thank you.
Uh,
I have a couple
Linda,
grandkids
any
in the
questions or-
background and, making it hard to hear at times.
Understood. Mayor Taylor, any comments?
I just had a follow-up question to Ms. Wentworth's request. So, Bert, it sounds like that it would automatically be done with how you're setting it up, what her request is. I'm just clarifying.
You're correct, yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
So I guess, Bert, the only thing in my mind, I was thinking that we'd see sort of a mock-up. And then we could say, oh, that helps me understand this problem, and that doesn't, that the mock-up might include the topography surrounding the airport, and that might help us explain why people at the top of Hillsborough seem to hear so much noise, get us a sense of, is that low frequency noise bouncing off the hills either side of a valley and concentrating as it goes up? That's what had been playing around in my head. For example, is it or is it not hitting the new hotel and bending around? If there was a way to demonstrate that, and even if right now we just consider it all preliminary draft, this is just trying to play around with the data and see how we can make it make sense to a non-engineer.
I believe that what you're looking for would be more likely to come out of the HMMH report.
Okay, so maybe that'll be the next step then. Moving us along, because we're at 4:19 and we end in 10 minutes, and I still don't see any questions up for participants or attendees as opposed to panelists. Would there be anything you would be ready or feel comfortable with reporting out to the full roundtable next week? And my guess is that your department has been hit with furloughs. My heart goes out to all of you and everything the airport is going through, just when so many great things were starting to happen.
No, we have not been hit with furloughs.
Okay.
Especially since the airport has taken federal money. That would be criminal to do that. We, not at least yet. September could show different. But as far as right now goes, budget-wise, yes, things are thinner. No ifs, ands, or buts. So we're trying to do the most we can with what we have. As far as speaking to the roundtable, I can just in a nutshell provide what my discussion with Greg Brachu was. I'm in fact due to jump on a call that's already started where we'll discuss more of that. And
Okay.
I can talk about the placement of a portable, the ground run-up trailer that we're talking about in the field.
Okay. Linda, are you okay with that? And other ground-based noise members? I just want to make sure that we're making these tiny steps forward, given that all of us have been hammered. I know that county staff has been pulled out to do things that they didn't want to. I'm doing things that I hadn't at all anticipated doing. So, you know, I completely understand, Bert, but tiny steps forward.
I might suggest that we'll work with you, Madam Chair, maybe just to summarize some of the things that were discussed just
Okay.
now. I think Bert also has his regular presentation to make. You okay?
I'm sorry, my cat just came in with a rat. Oh dear.
You go?
That's okay. No, I'm good. He will play with it.
Okay.
We're
So
almost done anyway.
I might suggest that we just summarize it because I think Bert is involved in another presentation for
Very
when,
good.
but maybe with a You're welcome. No, with a commitment for at a future date when some of this, after the trailer's gotten started and some of the other conversations with the vendor, that we do consider adding some data to the regular reports, just so that we're regularly seeing certain ground-based noise data, TBD, but that's regularly coming to the roundtable members who are interested in the public also.
Okay, if you
I
don't
very much appreciate that, Linda.
share a
Oh, sorry,
screen real
Bert.
quick. I can share a screen real quick with the map on it. Here we are.
Oh, great, thanks.
I'm just,
So here's the location that would be abeam the runways over here. You all can see
The trailer, you mean?
where we would possibly put the trailer.
Okay.
The one I prefer is actually location 2 down here, which would be looking this direction. And it would be very close to the fence line, right next to this piece of equipment here. So
And that's right next to the freeway.
it is. The trailer is currently sitting where this trailer is right now. And we're using it to look down towards the San Mateo Bridge. It was where we put it for our acceptance testing, but I believe we should relocate it down to location 2 as soon as possible. The one nice thing about being close to the freeway is, most of you notice this, but freeway noise tends to have a fairly consistent sound. You can almost block out a lot of that freeway if you know what that frequency range is. Aircraft would be operating in a different frequency range, and you can pull that out separately. So getting a little into the wizardry of Justin and his colleagues, but that's the plan for it.
okay. Okay, any questions then? Any questions from our attendees? All right, so, I'm sorry, I heard,
No, sorry, I was going to say, Chair, we do not have any hands raised. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Angela. All right then, so I don't think we need any action on this. Linda, I am not going anywhere, so I'm around if you need my input. And I am trying desperately to get caught up with things and to get my head back into airplane noise. I apologize to the airport, but right now it's really quite lovely. It's so quiet. But that is not good for any of our economies. So we want to use this opportunity because it is so easy to hear the different sounds and what's coming from where right now. And if that can help us figure out how to put better monitors or whatever, then we can at least make some use out of this time. Mr. Royce, anything?
No, I'm fine.
Ms. Taylor?
I just
Okay.
wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate the idea of the summary. So I think that's perfect for the next SFO meeting.
Excellent. All right then, so if there are no other questions, if anybody has some exciting, Bert, I don't know if you're following it, but today is High Speed Rail's open house on the draft EIR from San Francisco to San Jose. That's a big thing for Millbrae, so I'm a little distracted because that started at 4 o'clock. But I wish you all keep safe, keep healthy, and best of luck in people getting back into flying. I can't believe I'm saying that, but best of luck on that. All right,
Thank you,
you all
Madam
take
Chair.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
And
you.
Linda and Angela, thank you so much. And Justin, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.